Okay, can everyone hear me okay? So we'll reconvene then, and our next item on the agenda is with regards to our draft animal control bylaw. And as everyone is aware, we changed how we do our animal control bylaw. So part of this is an update for allows nothing is simple. A lot of things seem quite simple on the surface, but sometimes they aren't with regards to bylaw enforcement and control of the courts, especially during COVID. It's become very complicated. So staff has done a tremendous amount of work to try and bring us up to date and to be, again, it's an issue of fairness and being able to enforce the bylaws we have. So I'll turn over to Jenna for an update, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of today's report is, first of all, we're looking to close the loop on previous guidance that was given to us from Humane Society of Kitchener-Waterloo, Stratford and Perth. That's our third-party provider for all things that are animal control related. We're also providing a bylaw that closes questions that council had about 2.5, 3 years ago when this was last presented to council. We were talking about matters related to excrement, number of puppies within a property, when those puppies become adult dogs. That beginning content is what you'll find in the background section, and I'm not going to speak to it because the draft bylaw has included those details within it, but I do want to go into some of the newer information. There are 3 matters that are covered within the report section. The first one is prohibited animals that I'm going to go into. So when we look at Schedule A to the bylaw, it lists all prohibited animals that staff are recommending. Sorry, Council. So since the bylaw was prepared, staff have reconsidered a detail that's in there. It does list in the prohibited list rabbits. And what has become known is that staff's original intent was that we do not want rabbit farms within our residential, industrial, or commercial zones in St. Mary's. And that has happened from time to time across municipalities. That was the intent, but what about those families who wish to have a single rabbit in the home? What I am recommending is that within that prohibited section on page 72 under Lagomorpha, it would then be changed to saying hares, pikas, except domestic rabbits. And we'll add the domesticated piece to it, so it is evident that this is only for residential purposes. I would then like to include a clause within the bylaw that goes to state that there are no more than 3 such animals outside of dogs and cats that we've already addressed, so that we do not end up with a farm or a large home with any sort of animal, whether it's more than 3 rabbits, guinea pigs, gerbils, or anything else that individuals are looking to bring into homes. Why I'm asking the committee today to consider approval is so that we can get an updated bylaw on the books. And that updated bylaw, we can then begin fairly quick enforcement and have our animal control providers being able to go out to property owners when we have concerns about the number of dogs in the home, when we're dealing with at large or wandering issues, as well as when we're dealing with excrement. And I know there has been excrement concerns in the past, and there is the piece that is in the bylaw right now that states that feces must be picked up immediately. I'm waiting for some consultation to come back to our third-party provider so that we've had a recommendation from our lawyer about removing the word immediate, but I still require our animal control officers to have some timing within there. And I just want to make sure that that wording is right. All of this to say if council or if this committee does make a recommendation to a future council meeting to consider approving the bylaw, I will bring back and identify where those amendments are, going back to the rabbit piece, that it's except domesticated rabbits. And that will also bring back better language about how fast excrement must be removed from private property. We do want public property instances of excrement to be removed immediately. So I do commit to reporting back on that. That's it that I have for this first section related to prohibited animals. Actually, just before I do that, there was a question that has come forward about individuals who may keep rats. And when I look to the prohibited list, it does identify that within the rodentia name, an individual may keep rats or any sort of rodent under 1,500 grams. When I do a really rough and quick calculation, that's about 3 pounds. So it's my estimate that that will cover for individuals who do have a preference for keeping rats at their personal property. So I believe that would cover it. There will be exceptions, I'm sure, that we have to manage from time to time. Individuals who have letters from doctors stating that their animal is deemed to be a service animal. The town does not need to immediately acknowledge that that's approved. We do have to go through an accommodation conversation with that individual and work out whether or not in the end that individual would be permitted to have that service animal within the geographical boundaries of St. Mary's. Let me get to one other piece about cats before we leave from what the draft bylaw was recommending. On page 63 of the draft bylaw, and it's subsection 3.2. A question came forward to me is, how do we manage cats that are found to be at large or wandering in St. Mary's? And that provision that's in there goes further to state that no person shall permit any animal to be at large. And so if a cat is found to be roaming and that cat is known to reside at a specific residence, an individual can make a complaint known to our animal control officers. Again, that's through the Humane Society out of Stratford. When the complaint is received, an animal control officer will come out and begin to investigate. They can lay a number of charges, but the first two that I believe they would investigate is that animal has it been out left wandering at large, and also is that animal licensed. So I just wanted to close the loop on that. Chair Strathy, I turn that back to you, whether there are any questions specific to the prohibition of animals in St. Mary's.
Okay, thank you. So as has been suggested, we can sort of deal this multi-parts, and let's talk first about the prohibition list and questions with regards to the bylaw. Questions from council? Okay, so everyone's sort of on the same page as far as prohibitions and so forth. Okay, so the next fun part.
Exactly as Mayor Strathy has indicated, the next fun part is animal exhibits. There has been conversation within the media for a couple of years now about traveling exhibits and how zoos are managed. Still within the bylaw, zoos are not permitted, and we would go through the zoning bylaw in order to manage any request that comes forward for a zoo. But what was identified is that from time to time, there are animal exhibits that may come into St. Mary's. Those are examples of children's programs where different animals are coming out to that program, and the children have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about, reptiles as an example. There's also instances where animals that would be on this prohibited list and currently list on the prohibited list would not be welcome in St. Mary's. Those may be parades when we see animals walking down the street. Those may be museum programs where sheep are being sheared, again, for an educational purpose. technically by the bylaw, those programs are not permitted. What we have provided in this draft bylaw is a clause that any educational or temporary exhibit would be permitted with an exemption. The applicant does not need to apply to staff nor to council. It would be automatic as long as that exhibit or educational program does not last beyond 3 years. So we believe that we've covered that for now to ensure that parades can still go on, demonstrations of, historic historic opportunities that animals were used in our area, as well as any children's programs. If council, if this committee agrees to that provision, it is in the bylaw and nothing further would be changed at this time.
Okay, thank you. Questions with regards to this section? Everyone's okay with this? Okay, next, please.
So the final topic is urban chickens. A rather boring topic that I'm sure nobody's as excited about as I am. First of all, this originated from one complaint that staff were made aware of that was provided in a formal manner. Correspondence was received in the clerk's department about 2016. And the complaint was of other urban chickens that were in town. It was about the noise, the excrement from those chickens, as well as the potential for, disease and other rodents coming into the backyard. Since that time, staff have not received a formal complaint other than that one at a time. I do believe that there's been general discussion from time to time where a member of the public has approached council over the years, but it has not escalated to a formal complaint. Since the pandemic, or sorry, I shouldn't say since, but as of 2020 moving forward, staff have responded to about 15 inquiries about urban chickens. That isn't necessarily people that are interested in bringing chickens into St. Mary's. That also included individuals who are supporting backyard chickens or urban chickens in other municipalities, as well as different associations that support those backyard chicken owners. And it was also questions of what is permitted within the bylaw, so I know if my neighbor is within compliance. Again, no complaints received, just general questions about the topic. Staff unofficially know that there are chickens that reside in non-agricultural zone properties or backyards within St. Mary's, but we do not have a registry of those specific details, and we don't know how many. The reason why this is a topic that sits on your plate is the Municipal Act. Within section 10.2, it identifies that single-tiered municipalities may pass bylaws for matters including but not limited to the health, safety, and well-being of the persons in your community and also animals. So because of those two specific reasons, that is why it is sitting on your plate today to consider whether or not you wish to regulate the keeping of urban chickens in St. Mary's. Staff have presented 3 options in this report about urban chickens. As it stands today, chickens are not prohibited, are prohibited from being kept in St. Mary's on any non-agricultural zoned property. So again, they are prohibited. Urban chickens are not allowed. The committee may recommend to council to maintain that prohibition. And then staff would educate the public and put out what the requirements are moving forward. It would come forward as a complaint basis, and staff would manage those complaints with a third party by law enforcement support. But we would provide that education to the public and offer a compliance period. Staff are recommending it would be 2 years, which is about the average laying cycle for hens. And then after that 2 years, anytime complaints were to come forward, it would be immediate that property owner or urban chicken owner would have to come into compliance with the bylaw. The second option, if you do not wish to fully prohibit, is consideration of regulating. And there are two subcategories underneath the regulation. The first is regulation with no license. And this is like our fence bylaw. The council has approved a fence bylaw that regulates the size, the structure, the location of fences, and provides those regulations within a bylaw. There is no proactive enforcement of this. It is reactive, and no one needs to apply for a fence permit. When it is a general fence, I'm not speaking about swimming pool fences. The staff would need to develop regulations, and the three areas that I would suggest a regulation be formulated around is the number of chickens that are permitted, the type, as in, do you want to permit roosters, which tend to be the louder, more vocal all day long bird, or if you wish to just permit hens on properties, and then also what that coop design is. And the reason I recommend the coop design is so that there are some standards around what the size must be so that they're not too small, so that if a complaint comes in about possible cruelty to those urban chickens, when PAWS, which is a provincial regulated authority who manages the well-being of animals, when they come in, they know that the town has gone to its extreme measure to protect those animals. There would be no registry of owners, there'd be no inspection, and there would be no gathering of license fees. And the reason why we have license fees in place from time to time is to recoup the administrative costs associated with a program such as this. The town would respond to complaints, investigate, and then decide if it can move forward with laying charges. That would be the piece where costs could attempt to be recouped. I really intended no puns. It's probably not the only one. I will do a much better job moving forward, I hope. As I said, this does not create a financial mechanism to support the program based on administrative time, and it relies on the general tax base for any sort of financial support to this program. It is less resource intensive on the front end because there are not inspections. It's just we would direct applicants, individuals who are interested, to the website, to the bylaw, and they would be able to get their resources from there. Again, we've already talked about why roosters should not be considered at any costs. There has been a discussion about how many. There was reference to 4 in past years, and within the bylaw, I have put 5. The reason why I went with 5, average family of possibly 4 in a time where individuals are looking for alternative ways to provide food within the home rather than having to go directly to grocery stores. If a chicken lays within 2 days about 1.5 eggs, then by the time you get to the equation, I figured there would be about 7 to 8 eggs over 2 days for a family of 4. Math also has been a fantastic opportunity for this experience. But just to give you a couple of examples of the numbers of chickens that are permitted in other municipalities, Brampton allows 2 hens for less than 1 acre. And for 1 acre plus, they would permit up to 10 chickens. 4 hens are permitted in Toronto, 5 are permitted in Central Manitoulin, and Guelph will permit up to 10. That second component of option 2 being to regulate is then to license. Everything I've already said within the no license scheme would still be in effect, except there would be an application, there would be a licensing fee, and there would be a requirement for an inspection prior to that approval. The benefits of considering a licensing fee is that there is now a registry, so it is understood within the town where those chickens reside. The inspection, the approval is subject to the inspection, so we would have more control about how it looks in a backyard, how close those coops may be to neighbors, and also the number of chickens that would be there. And it is closer to being a cost neutral program than without the licensing. Again, because the Municipal Act includes that bylaws relating to the health and safety of persons may be considered by council. That's why it's for you to deliberate today. Staff are recommending that regulations regarding the keeping of urban chickens should be considered if you are looking to have chickens in town. And while the resources do not exist currently for staff or administrative support, that licensing system will help with a better cost neutral program. The one piece that I have not spoken about, if the committee does recommend to council to keep chickens, is this, in my world, I'm hearing about it more about avian bird flu. And I know that there are a number of cases throughout Quebec and British Columbia and Alberta right now. And I believe there's been about 1 million chickens that have had to be destroyed in Quebec just recently, because avian bird flu is highly contagious and can get into flocks fairly quickly. In those instances, it's not backyard chickens or urban chickens. This is large businesses. However, when avian bird flu is around, it does, it's highly transmissible, and geese, I believe, are an animal that can certainly transmit that fairly quick. When the chickens are within the backyard, even though they're in a coop, that exposure still exists to the disease or the virus, and can be transmitted. And if there are rodents or anything else that are coming into contact with those birds, then it is now a walking program, a walking problem from backyard to backyard. So I'm happy to help with any questions that there may be.
Okay, before we get into discussion about the chicken debate that everyone wants to add to their list of interesting things we talk about at council. The one point I don't want to get away from too is that we have engaged the Stratford Perth Humane Society to regulate our animals in St. Mary's, and it's important that we give them the tools to do so. So I think if the debate gets too complicated, we may want to table part of it as suggested by staff, so that the people we've hired to do the job can do their job in terms of the bylaw. There was no issues raised about the animal bylaws. So I just want to put that out there that I may ask for a motion for that for the discussion if we can't come to consensus on where to go forward. But we'll open the floor then for questions or comments with regards to the suggestion presented with regards to backyard chickens. Councillor Alward.
Thanks, your worship. So I guess my question is more to inform myself, but so if we suddenly decided to regulate chickens through a licensing system, do we reckon we'd see such an influx of people suddenly having chickens? Because we're all well aware that there are some people that do, as it is currently illegal under the bylaw, but regardless, they do. So the avian bird flu thing, realistically, if the amount of people with chickens currently stays similar or the same, we're just as at risk as we were before without a bylaw. So I'm not certain that that's like a convincing countermeasure to me. Does anybody else have any opinions on that?
Questions or comments, again, with regards to the bylaw? Councillor Lucas?
I guess my thought is it currently exists. I would, I like the approach that, you know, it's a complaint-based system. I hate the thoughts of more bureaucracy with licensing chickens. I don't necessarily, I'm not strong one way or another. I agree with Councillor Alward. I think the bird flu is a non-starter for me as far as a concern. But yeah, I'm flexible either way. They exist. So if we can come up with a solution to have an appropriate, like the mayor said, have an appropriate option for our animal control people to follow as far as a regulation goes, and keep it a complaints-based system. That's kind of where I land.
Councillor Eddy?
Thank you, Worship. I would suggest after reading that 2A actually represents more of a status quo than than where we are right now. It's happening and we know it's happening, and it's as it's been mentioned, we haven't had an actual complaint since 2016. I don't have an issue, and I know that within a stone's throw of my house, there are at least 2, if not 3, being kept, and noise, odor, none of it is an actual issue for our family.
Thanks. Councilor Pridham?
Thank you. I'm landing in the same space as well, without complaints, which we haven't had. We've only had inquiries. Then to me, it seems like the community accepts the chickens. And I think it's just really to be very clear that roosters are prohibited in our documentation here. No roosters at all, and just chickens.
Councilor Craigmont?
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess when I first read the report, knowing that we do have people with chickens in town, my concern was if you have 9 people with chickens, they're all doing a great job, and you have one that isn't, what's our recourse on getting the, one bad apple spoils it for everybody. And then I just happened to be riding in a vehicle yesterday with a recognized citizen of the town involved with chickens. And for some reason, I just asked a question, and the question was, the avian flu in chickens. And I was grilled for 10 minutes on, we have a large agricultural community surrounding St. Mary's, which supports St. Mary's, that are all involved in chickens. And there's not one of them would ever support urban chickens in the town of St. Mary's, just in case they were ever let out in their own yard and came into contact. And there's, give me names of people locally that had over 50,000 birds destroyed and things. So unfortunately, this was in a 10-minute conversation at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. I haven't been allowed to do any further research, but I do not want to see a decision made today without hearing from some of our neighbors who are actually chicken farmers. And because I don't understand enough about the transmission of the avian flu. And if it is a real threat, then we should be very cautious on what we're allowing. So without any more data, I'd just like to leave it there. And if I need to make a motion to table it, I would.
Further questions, comments? Councilor Luna?
Thank you, Worship. I agree with Councillor Craigmore. Years ago, at a place where I worked, we brought in baby chicks for the residents to touch and feel, and it was Easter, I guess. And a visitor came in and he was extremely upset that we had these chickens on site because of the same thing. He said it was terribly irresponsible of us. So I agree with Councillor Craigmore that we should maybe table that part of it and check with local surrounding chicken farms.
Okay, if I can, I just gonna say where I'm at too, because I mean, chickens have been prohibited in my research since the 1960s in the bylaw, but we all know what's happened. But the reality is that I'm not necessarily comfortable that the town has, respectfully, has the knowledge, to Councillor Craigmore's point, to set up what is a good standard. So if we're gonna allow chickens all of a sudden legally, we have to set a standard of what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable. And I'm not so sure that we have the capability or the background to do that. I have friends that I've had this discussion with, and the reality is the avian flu gets often spread very simply through different birds, through excrement, people tracking in the factories. I don't know if you've been to a food factory, you have to wipe your feet or in the disinfectant before you go through all these type of things. So while it isn't a threat, the reality, isn't a huge threat something we've seen here. The reality is I think if we're going to say, yeah, you can do this, I don't know, before we say, yeah, we can do this, we'd have to have certain standards and set in place. And the debates that I've read, some of the articles I've read, I don't think there's been a lot of that. Like for municipalities say you can have 10 chickens. Good God, I think that's irresponsible. It's not for me to judge, their decision making, but I look at it and I think, for my own purpose and not my own municipality, doesn't make sense for me to allow someone to have 10 or 4 or 5 chickens that has, you know, in a place where I'm not setting a standard, what is responsible and what is realistic for the neighbor. Because the problem is when the neighbor calls Jenna, because that's who they usually call. Sometimes they call me, but when they call the clerk's office and say, you know, there's these things making noise, blah, 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 and says, you know, what does the town put in place to ensure my safety? That becomes an issue. You know, because, you know, none of us are experts in this field. And if we were to enact something without at least having some sort of standard, I think it would be irresponsible. But that's kind of where I'm at. And I've gone back and forth because of the pandemic. I mean, when we talked about this pre-pandemic, like, yeah, a few chickens, whatever. And then the pandemic became more popular. And then you look into it and you think, I don't know if that's the right way to go. Councilor Luna?
Thank you, Worship. Well, and then there's the other issue that isn't really mentioned here, that these people selling their eggs and salmonella poisoning quite easily from eggs. So are we responsible for that? Are they responsible for that? Who's responsible for bad eggs?
Has any of the research talked about legalities? Okay, this is interesting. Mr. Kittmer seems quite excited to talk about the legal.
We Kittmers have a fondness for chickens, actually. It's like genetic. So a person who raises their own eggs, you're allowed to sell unpasteurized, ungraded eggs from your property. So the Egg Board of Ontario will allow that. You're not allowed to deliver them. So you're responsible as the person offering them, and then the person buying them is in there. So if there to be no responsibility fall on us, that's already given as a right in law. So if you have chicken, I grew up on a farm where we did this. We had 500 free-range chickens, and people showed up and they bought eggs from us. And it's the producer's responsibility, not the municipalities.
Okay, thank you for that. Further questions or comments? Where to go with this? Councilor Reddy?
Thank you, Worship. I hate to be the one to throw it out there because this is already taking so long, but I would love to have just more information. So if we could table this until we hear from perhaps a couple of experts in the field, one being the Kitchener-Waterloo Humane Society, who takes care of us, and then perhaps a chicken farmer themselves would be good if we could lay that out.
Councilor Lucas?
Thank you, Sue Matt. Just curious that our clerk has identified one of the municipalities as being Guelph as permitting chickens, which is, I would say, the hub of agricultural education in our area. So maybe that's an opportunity to look at what they've got, excuse me, in their bylaw and extrapolate, pull some stuff. That would be the community, I would say, that has some good direction, I would say.
Councilor Craigmont?
Yeah, in response to, because that's a fairly large populous area, they may not have any knowledge of the agricultural and just made a decision with all the inputs too. I mean, what I heard yesterday in my 10-minute conversation, I'm more than willing to go to option 1 and prohibit chickens. You know, I didn't hear that from everybody else, so therefore I'm willing to give an opportunity to hear the other side, but I mean, once you put it in there where you may prohibit it, if you had 10 now, are you going to have 30 or 40 or 50, or where does it stop? And how are we going to, and I think you're going to need a lot more than just, you're going to have to go and check on them routinely.
Councilor Alward?
Thank you. I think this kind of circles back to your point, Mayor Strathey. And I guess I would just say, like, if we are going to continue with prohibition and encourage that, then we're going to have to start banging on doors, right? Like, all the people with chickens, like, we have to shut them down, correct? Or within 2 years. We've allowed this to go on for like quite a while now. So I mean, what's really, like, are we kind of like, excuse my language, like half-assing our bylaw enforcement on this? Is that?
I don't know if I'd use that term, but we certainly that's certainly been the approach for the town for many, many years. We didn't have a bylaw officer, and in all fairness, let's be quite frank, and so we have gone to engaging. It's a serious step process. I mean, we acted on a complaint process, and then we've gone to actually hiring a company to help us with some expertise. So the answer to your question is yes. You know, I'm sure there's probably some bylaw infractions at my house. I hope no one knocks on my door, but that's but the reality is that's why we're having a discussion. We have to decide where to go with it, and we'll have to make that decision at this table. And that's why some of us, including myself, are struggling with it. Councilor Pridham? Yeah.
Thank you, through your worship. I hear complaints about cats and I hear complaints about dogs, but we don't really hear complaints about chickens. So I think the community in general is kind of okay with the idea, or else we would be hearing more complaints. And the suggestion that the University of Guelph, where it's an agricultural school, and within that municipality they allow chickens, I don't know if they went to the extent of asking the university for information, but maybe that is because it's within their community, maybe they do have some suggestions on how safe that is for the area farming around. So that might be an investigative area.
Councilor Elwood? Yeah.
I think I'd also like to table this and get more information from relevant stakeholders and various activist groups then.
An interesting day when Mr. Kipper wants to get ahead of what I was about to say. That doesn't always happen, so this is fun. This is really fun. Please put this in my memory. A couple of points that I want to make. We have looked at what's within Guelph. We've looked at St. Thomas, who is just offering a pilot program, and we certainly have looked at what's in another, ever since London first brought this forward about 4 years ago. So we do have some of that background. But to begin to bring that information to you as a recommendation was not something that we wanted to spend our time with based on other council direction on what was important at this time. To Councillor Allward's point, it has been some time that we are aware it has existed in the community and we have not proactively enforced for a few reasons, some of them being we know that things were happening during the pandemic. And we knew that a report back was due to council. So before upsetting neighbors to say this is not permitted and remove your chickens immediately, we wanted to give that time so that we could get further information from council. But something that did happen as a result of holding off is that potentially more individuals have brought chickens into town and it may have just exacerbated the problem. But again, I don't get complaints. I know that I hear of individuals saying that they know that there are some chickens in town. I just don't know how many properties that is and how many individuals are comfortable because it's quiet in their backyard, which is great. So to Mr. Kittmer's point about tabling, what that does, if you were to table the conversation, then you are waiting for me to report back or staff to report back on this subject. What I'm recommending you do today is we separate the conversation. If you are comfortable with the bylaw as it is presented, which I will identify does prohibit chickens. And if we are going to pass that so that we can give our bylaw enforcement the tools they require to enforce. I will also take direction within the third that statement of what you would like staff to report back on. And we will do that if it's a licensing or non-licensing, but definitely regulation, then we will do that. I am asking the committee to think about how soon you want that report back to come. I will share with you that I take direction from you about what you want me to work on. But as much as urban chickens are something that keep me awake at night, reporting back to you about data, security, and records retention is what keeps me up during the day to get through the night, to stay awake. And that I now have 2 staff that are supporting us to move forward and get that bylaw, a records retention software program, policies and work procedures before you. And that is our primary focus unless you today tell me something different. And then we will pause that and do our very best to protect the municipality with that data that we have. And I will get more information from you as quick as you would like about urban chickens.
So would you have a time frame for that scenario, Jenna, just so people are aware? Because I don't think, in full transparency, you and I did have this discussion yesterday and talked about the amount of workload in the clerk's office right now is overwhelming. I don't think respectfully, everyone is aware of the amount of setback we've had as a result of the cyber breach this summer in terms of getting work done in projects. It's affected every single thing in the organization, and respectfully, I think that message needs to be put out again. So, I don't know in terms of it, could just give council an idea of a time frame of what you're thinking, if that's a path to go.
If it's the committee's wish to have an immediate report back, we can be back in about 6 weeks from now. If you will give us some latitude to begin to compile some information and report back to you within the next 6 months, acknowledging that chickens are prohibited and that we are working towards a 2-year compliance. And that can be changed at any time after 6 months of reporting back with some further information for council or the committee to consider.
Thoughts and questions? Councillor Pridham?
Just a clarification. So when someone does come and complains if we actually get a complaint, that 2-year leeway for them to remove their chickens, that's not established, but you would still kind of follow through with that idea for enforcement.
So if that's what is chosen today, I will either write it into the bylaw that there is now a 2-year compliance period related specifically to the keeping of chickens, which can be amended in the future. Or we can write that into a resolution so that when you pass the bylaw, you are giving further direction that staff initiate a 2-year compliance period related to the keeping of chickens, and that by such and such a date, all property owners are expected to be in compliance and enforcement will begin.
Another step. So if that was established and we would then change it depending on the information we got, and it would open up a window of about 2 years or a year or so for that further information to come back to council. So there wouldn't be as much of a push to get that information. So people, status quo would be 2 years. Yeah.
Further questions or comments? Councillor Craigmont?
I tend to, with the way this conversation is going, but I don't want Jenna to start doing it. She's got a long time frame now, but I don't want her to start doing extra work. And I think we could arrange for some delegations early June to come in and present to us as a learning tool on it.
So just going forward, we will just strike that out and we won't really do anything to address the chickens. We're just kind of really just going status quo.
Yeah, that's not my thought. The thought is that we would ask to pass the bylaw. Status quo is chickens are prohibited,
Yeah.
right? So that is status quo. So if I think this is a discussion where it's going, it would be option 1 that we would say chickens are prohibited, and that we would direct staff to, there seems to be a willingness and wanting some more information in the future, but we're not going to prioritize it as next week as well. And we have that window to have this fun discussion again. Councillor Luna.
I'm not seeing it as staff needing to really do anything. It's just, again, delegations or people, farmers writing to us and saying, please don't do this, Okay, again.
There'll be an incredible amount of work for staff to do. So and the example I'll give you is that I presented to you the commemoration policy today. To me, in my view, that was a fairly routine and easy exercise for me to pull together because I took 4 examples, mined the best practices and whatnot. We did a quick tally of the amount of time that went into it, and over 50 hours of staff time went in that between my time, Jenna's time, senior management time, and others. So this is a far more complicated subject where we are gonna have to research multiple, like, we don't have a bylaw today. And what Jenna's gonna report back to you on, if you do this, is option one, but she's also gonna give you a draft bylaw. Like, the best way to bring this forward is to give you a bad draft bylaw reflecting option 2A, because I get the sense that's what's preferred here. So she's gonna have to draft that so you can see it and understand it. And these bylaws aren't short, these standards aren't easy, and the research we have to do is not also simple. So it'll probably be at least a good 100 hours of staff time after you bring in your delegations and all that. I think sometimes, council, we get lost here thinking things are like simple, but I'm telling you, I spent 3 days straight, so 24 hours of my time writing that commemoration policy. Then all of my SMT reviewed it in detail. Then we met, like, this takes a long time to do. These are not quick and easy projects. So every time something is asked of us, it takes a long time. And that's why Jen is being very clear with you today that if you want it quick, then you have to tell her to put aside data. But if you're gonna ask her to put aside data, then we have to be prepared for the consequences of that. And we already know what those consequences are. So it's not gonna be fast, and it's not gonna be quick. It's not gonna be easy. We can't have a delegation from an egg farmer who doesn't like it, a delegation from the University of Guelph that says they like it, and then have a bylaw and magic happens. That drafting the bylaw will take a long, long time.
Councillor Luna.
Thank you, Richard. I wasn't necessarily asking for delegations. I'm just asking for, local chicken farmers to write a letter to us or whatever, make it known to us what their feelings are about this. And if we passed it today as it stands, that chickens are prohibited, and then they make it known to us that there's not a concern, then we can make an amendment to the bylaw, correct, in the future. But I think we should pass it as option 1 today. And but still ask for, if there's concerns, if Councillor Craigmile has an in with chicken farmers there, that we could get some more information from our local farmers.
Can I just add one thing respectfully, that I think it's important to remember that today, irregardless of how we enforce things, chickens are prohibited. I've had nobody call me and say, hey, I want the bylaw changed. Anyone here at this table had a call say, I want the bylaw changed? I've had calls the other way because people have not looked after their chickens. So I'm comfortable passing number 1 and giving the tools to the KW thing. And then if we get into the big, huge debate where we have people in council's chambers saying we need 10 chickens in the backyard, I'm okay to go through that process. But as of today, I don't see anyone at this table saying, I want chickens legal in St. Mary's, because right now they're not, right? So I think we should proceed with option 1, give it to the Humane Society. And if we have this debate 3 months down the road, we have it. But the reality is right now we don't. And so the problem is we identified, and it was a previous council, not this one respectfully, that we had issues with bylaw enforcement. So we took some steps. We've hired a company, we've improved so forth. Is it right or wrong? Do we all know certain things are happening? Of course, but the reality is since 1960s in the first bylaw, chickens were prohibited. Sorry, Brent, I cut you off.
And I was gonna touch on Councillor Luna's point, and this is where staff becomes the annoyance, and this is where this issue will become big, like it is in every other community, because I'm happy to bring in the egg farmers and the agricultural people. And I think Councillor Craigmile has probably already articulated the opinion here that avian bird flu is a very real concern of theirs, because they will end up having to kill a flock and things like that. But we staff aren't doing our job if we only invite one side of the issue to the table. We will have to bring the other side of that issue to the table, and we'll have to go out to the community. So now this issue of this, let's bring a couple delegations, let's hear from them. Let's just hear from the egg farmers because they don't like it. If you don't hear from the other side and hear the people who are in support of it, then you're going to make a decision completely slanted in one decision and in one way. And that's how this becomes huge in every community, because this is a hot political topic, and there are very polarized, divided opinions on whether you should have chickens or not, whether they're safe or not. And again, we're prepared to do that. That's our job. It's just you have to understand, if I'm not doing my job effectively, and I'm not guiding you effectively if I allow one to come in and we don't invite the other.
Okay, questions, comments? Sorry, Councillor Looney, you want to say something?
Thank you, Worship. So my recommendation would be that the third that supports option 1, And that it's made clear to the public that there is no grandfathering other than the 2-year period. Because I've heard chatter on, again, social media that, well, I'm grandfathered. This doesn't matter what they say. I'll always have my chickens because I'm grandfathered. There's no grandfathering other than that 2-year period, correct?
Jenna, can you speak to that? That's the intention, right? That there's no grandfathering if you have chickens on a residential property other than the 2-year window, we're going to allow for the birds to turn over. And that was, maybe you can explain that, why you picked the 2-year window as well, or maybe Mr. Kittmer wants to, because he seems to have some expertise in egg laying.
Certainly. So I'm going to not reference the word grandfathering. For me, grandfathering means bringing in and keeping permanently. What we are offering is a 2-year come to compliance term. So if the bylaw passes that chickens are prohibited, we would then put out an education campaign that this is the expectation. There are no chickens or other animals throughout any of town. And within 2 years, anyone with backyard chickens or urban chickens must be in compliance. And we will make that date very clear. The reason that we recommended the 2 years, the average laying life expectancy of a hen is around 2 years for eggs that you wish to use. So we figure that if council passes this and then fast forward 2 years, those chickens are likely moving on to retirement and no longer laying eggs and can go out to a wonderful chicken pasture in another municipality.
Okay, thoughts, questions? Councillor Pridham.
What I'm seeing is we're just carrying forward what we already have, but adding the 2 years. And that's what we're changing. And then there'll probably be an outcry from the municipality for people that are very, enthusiastic about this. And we'll see where that lands on our plate. And that could land relatively soon. Who's to say, right? So
Although the current rules are they're prohibited and no one said to me, I want chickens. Councillor Lucas.
Yeah, thank you through the mayor. I guess my thought is I feel like we're circling over nothing. There currently is no complaints. So if we give the 2-year grace period, for lack of a better term, is that 2 years since we say now, or is that going to be 2 years after we've received a complaint, after the bylaw enforcement has gone up on I'm just, let sleeping dogs lie. If we have the complaint or bylaw enforcement, I don't know, just a thought. If it's not a problem now, why would we make this a problem? Alluding to what Councillor Pridham has said, if we put it out there that you got 2 years to get rid of your chicken, we're gonna have chicken people. Now you may get that call, Mr. Mayor Strathy.
With all due respect, something that comes from living in a world of black and white and being in the clerk's department for some time. It is my recommendation that if you set a law to be such and such, that you are working to get everybody in full compliance and that we never have an opportunity where we might be saying 4 birds are permitted for a short period of time while we report back, so that myself or anybody in the future sitting in this role never has to come back to you and say, we allowed this to be flexible for a period of time. And now we know we have more chickens in town that a future council may wish to prohibit. So if the bylaw is going to say prohibit, I strongly recommend that we are working to prohibit and we do not allow anyone to exceed that 2 years of compliance once staff are aware that those chickens exist. It's just, it just doesn't lead to good governance and setting the rules, because then it means that you're flexible. And if you say no, do you really mean yes? With all due respect. Yeah.
Okay, questions, comments? I'm open to putting something on the floor if someone wanted to. I don't think we have unanimity on this, but the reality is that, you know, I'll go back to my opening comments is that we do need to put in effect. At least, you know, there's been a lot of work with the Stratford Perth Humane Society so that they can enforce. And the other part of the process, Jenna, can you talk a little bit about bylaws getting approved and about enforcement? Because this is the part that's complicated. And I just want to make sure everyone understands this, and not that I totally understand. I'm not suggesting that, but sort of what happens in sort of with a bylaw when we pass it and enforcement. Do you mind speaking to that just a little bit?
Certainly. What I believe Mayor Strathy is referencing is the period of time, and I know that I mentioned this when we spoke about the traffic bylaw. Once we get to the point of council passing the bylaw, it may come into force and effect, but there is a piece about enforcement that does not actually take hold until we receive approval. First of all, the municipality must submit correspondence, including a certified copy of the bylaw and all short form wording that staff must create. Those are what your tickets or your provisions are when you wish to lay a fine. Those go off to the Attorney General for Ontario. It is reviewed there, first of all, to make sure that that those tickets can be upheld in their courts. Then they send it to the Regional Senior Justice for this area, and that Regional Senior Justice is the one who puts the final stamp and states, yes, this may move forward. Our prosecutors, our court will support if something of this nature comes forward. A number of reasons. The Attorney General passed away a few years ago. They were waiting to replace, and it wasn't very quick. And then COVID, and there are always bylaws coming in that go through this process. There is quite a delay in getting that approval back. I'm told about 4 months. But I know during the pandemic, our smoking bylaw was more like 8 or 9 months before we could actually write a ticket. Going back to what I was trying to allude to, it is almost the same example. We've passed a bylaw, but we can't do anything about it because the courts can't support our enforcement at this time. So the sooner we can get it, it will go through that channel. And then Senior Regional Justice approves, and now our bylaw enforcement can issue those tickets right away.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments, Councillor Craigmont?
Thank you, Mayor Strathy. Jenna, can I just want to ask one other question? We're not having the complaints, but we did have one. It was regarding noise, smell, and rodents. If our bylaw enforcement goes to check on that and they find that that is true, they still get 2 years?
I believe within the staff report, I spoke to this, and if I didn't, this would be my answer for you. They would get 2 years. Anybody that has a chicken in St. Mary's would be, first of all, our first step, we would provide education through our animal control or bylaw enforcement. This is the expectation. This is what you are expected to come into compliance with, and you have 2 years. The second call, same property. Yes, we had 2 years of compliance, but there are clearly new issues, and an order may be laid against that property to cease the activity and come into compliance immediately. When an order is laid, we place that order on that property owner, but it goes before the justice at the Provincial Offences Court in Stratford, and it is up to them to review the bylaw, recognize that we tried our very best to allow the opportunity for compliance in that 2 years. And then the municipality, the prosecutor, the bylaw enforcement has submitted enough information why 2 years is no longer necessary. Let's go straight to strict enforcement.
Okay, questions, comments? Want to put something on the floor? Yep. Okay, can you just say that, please? Yeah.
Yes, I would put option 1 on the floor. Can I make it just a quick comment about another part of the bylaw concerning animals and hot vehicles? I'm concerned about the appropriate temperature and appropriate ventilation, because that's subjective. I have read that 22 degrees centigrade, an outdoor temperature of 22 degrees centigrade or above, you should not leave an animal in the car. So I'm just wondering, should we put a specific temperature there, or have you found that anywhere else that And then once that's answered, I would put option 1 on the table.
So this specifically came out a recommendation of what the Humane Society has been managing. What I will do is investigate if there are bylaws that go further into the outdoor temperature and look. I don't believe that it is. If a enforcement officer feels that it is hot enough that the animal should not be in there, then they will do it. But we can also have within our education campaign that this is now the law and these are guidelines that you should follow. 22 degrees on a cloudy day may be different than a sunny day. So we'll look to see what other education is out there. If I may, just for a quick moment with respect to the proposed resolution, the third that statement, if it is your will of the committee that they are prohibited and you are not asking for that report back until, communication comes in from the public that they wish something different. If you are not looking for a report back, I would suggest remove that statement. I don't need your support for any option because the draft bylaw as presented to you does include the prohibition of chickens. So please just skip over that statement unless I didn't understand about the report.
Councillor, you agree with that in terms? So I'm going to put this on the floor for debate then, and I will read as follows. It's moved by Councillor Luna that admin 2023 draft animal control bylaw report be received, that the committee supports the inclusion of the draft list of prohibited animals of the draft animal control bylaw, that the strategic priorities committee recommends to council that council consider bylaw, and this is, again, we don't know the number, XX 2023 being a bylaw to regulate and restrict animals in the town of St. Mary's. Moved by Councillor Luna. Is there someone willing to second that motion? Councillor Craigmile. And I'll open for discussion. Councillor Edney?
Today, we're moving this to council where some people from within town may see this on the agenda and wish to comment on it. So when we move this, we aren't moving the actual bylaw, we're moving it to council to become a bylaw. I just wanted to make sure that procedure was made public.
Councillor Pridham?
Just a question, because we haven't identified an option. Does that mean the 2 years doesn't stand? Because that was within that option. So if we remove that piece, right?
Clerk, for clarification, please. Yeah.
Certainly. Recognizing that that is the recommendation of the committee, I will ensure that is identified within the bylaw or the staff recommendation, the resolution, and I'll include that reference to a 2-year compliance period. I will make note of that, and you will tell me when you see that pulled from these minutes at next Tuesday's meeting and make sure that it's there.
Luna, Councillor Craigmile, you're okay with that? Okay, all right. Okay, further questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question then. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Okay, so that brings us then to, thank you, Jenna, for that. Our next meeting is June 20th, 2023, 9 a.m. for the strategic priorities. Is there anything else? We have a couple minutes. Anything else going on anyone want to talk about in terms of meetings? Nothing? Okay, so then I will seek a motion. This meeting, the strategic priorities committee is adjourned at 11:33 a.m. Someone willing to move that motion? Moved by Councillor Luna, seconded. Councillor Lucas. Any further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you for today.